great to see familiar faces. I feel like we have finally created this little subgroup within NIRSA, so it is super exciting to see you all in youth programs roundtable number 4, which is crazy because it means we've been in quarantine for about 4 months, 3 to 4 months, depending on where you're at. We'll give people a couple minutes to log in, get in, but per usual, and I'll just, before we do introductions, if you can add your organization or institution to your Zoom name, that seems to be super helpful for people. Awesome. Oh, and I don't have mine. How bad. I'm such a bad example. Awesome. So we will go ahead and get started. My name is Abby Van Note. I serve as the coordinator of instructional and inclusive programs at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I am joined today, I'll go back to your slide, by Marissa from Cal Poly Pomona. You want to introduce yourself?
So as Abby said, I'm from Cal Poly Pomona. I'm the youth programs graduate assistant, and I'm running our virtual summer camp this summer.
Awesome. And for context, I'm not running any virtual camp programming, so I brought in an expert in Marissa, and she'll kind of help to give us some tangible ideas, and I can facilitate our conversation today. So at your institution or your organization, if you haven't, same ground rules. If you've been with us before, this session is being recorded and we posted to NIRSA's website. Keep yourself on mute. We'll use the chat function primarily, and Marissa and myself can monitor that piece. We'll pull out some good ideas and have people speak if they feel comfortable, but chat is totally acceptable. There are continued discussion boards on the American Camp Association and NIRSA Connect if you're looking for specific resources. Making sure we have had 0 issues with this, but we're respecting all attendees and their concerns, focusing on our role as professionals. So for bullet points, I would be remiss if we don't talk about where we are in our current society. So we're just gonna talk about that quickly, center ourselves in that space, the status of summer camps, and then we'll dive into virtual programming and the reopening of in-person programs. I think it's super important, especially as professionals who work with our future generations, that we consider at the forefront of our work the Black Lives Matter movement and the oppression of Black Americans in this country. So I just wanted to open up that space if anybody has any comments or ways that they have talked about this at camp or with kids. And if we have no comments, that's okay, but I want to make sure that we're giving that some space if folks have any ideas. Okay. I did share a link in the chat for an organization that has been very helpful for our camp families. EmbraceRace.org is kid-focused, talking about race within America. It's been a good resource for our parents and something that we've been able to share widely. So if that is a space that you're trying to find resources on, this organization has been helpful for us. Oops, sorry. Status of summer camp, we've done a poll in the past, but I'm just gonna throw our Google Doc in here. If your camp is not on this list, or if your camp status has changed, I would highly recommend you editing this document. As of yesterday morning, I took a look at everyone who's in here, And it looks like we had about 99 participants, so 53% have canceled, 21% were waiting to make a decision. A lot of those were May/June 1, so that may have changed for people. 12% modified in-person camp, and 6% had already done virtual programming by the time that they had edited this. So if you all want to see what people are doing in your area and or at your institution or camp, I would highly encourage that piece. Awesome. So we're going to try to spend about half an hour talking about virtual camp and then 20-ish minutes talking about reopening considerations. But if that gets swapped around, we'll roll with it per usual. Awesome. So we'll open it up. Parents' perspectives. So for those of you who have started virtual camps, have you gotten any feedback from your parents, made any changes? Let's throw those ideas in the chat. How people may be engaging their families in decisions about virtual camp, or considerations that those parents or families on the call have about virtual camp programming. And Marissa, maybe while people are running into the chat, anything that you've gotten from your families in where you've been virtually camping?
So our families seem to really enjoy it. More for the 8 to 9-year-olds. The 5 to 7-year-olds, it's a little difficult to keep them on a Zoom call without the parent support. But our parents have been very understanding with that and been helping out. We have had a good chunk of our older kids initially start to drop out, and as soon as we saw that, we started changing how we ran it. So instead of doing our opening camp circle all together, we ended up doing it in our age-appropriate breakout rooms so that we could tailor it to them. And that way they get their age-appropriate. They don't want to do, okay, how do we put safety first? It's, we put safety first, can you agree to do that? All right, who wants to talk? And they just want to talk and have that informal discussion and connections that they've been missing out on.
Awesome. Has anybody else received any feedback or from parents or families? I saw that Nick right now is providing resources for families. That's what we're doing too. Parents are appreciative of that.
I've been surprised at our parent feedback. We initially had planned to have only like one session a day, and then we're like, no, we'll have two sessions, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, but we'll put a good break in there so the kids have some time away from the screen and they could go eat and take care of everything else in between. But our parents think that our break from 11 to 1:30 is too long, and they just want their kids on it for the entire time.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to switch from parents' perspectives and open it up to maybe potential types of programming. So Marissa, do you want to talk about what your camp looks like right now? And other folks can put that in the chat, potential programs you may be doing or maybe thinking about doing.
So ours, we're doing as minimal supplies as needed or as possible, and it's just common household items, as well as our staff are trained to improvise. So if the kid doesn't have a tube from a toilet paper roll to make their little music rain stick, then we can use a piece of paper and roll it up and tape it and use that instead. But we're providing arts and crafts twice a week, STEM twice a week, performing arts twice a week, and recreation activities twice a week, so getting them up and moving. And then on Fridays we have a virtual field trip, and in the afternoon they do their performances that they've been working on throughout the week, and they also get to do our Freestyle Friday. So they get their choice of 3 different chat room or breakout rooms, and they get to do a chat room, a drawing room, or a games room. So they get to choose which one they go into, and they enjoy having that freedom and that informal time. We are not recording the sessions because it's kids, and that's even more privacy and photo releases that we have to get set up, and then we have to be able to store it securely. So we chose not to do recording. We just make sure that we are rotating staff through the room so that the staff isn't alone with the kids. And we had about 60 people register per week, but we've only been getting about 30 each meeting.
Awesome. I think Crystal brought up a really good point in the chat that I want to draw attention to. Maybe this should have been a poll question, but are people being allowed or not allowed to run virtual camp programs? I know I was talking to a colleague the other day, and their university hasn't said that they can't run a virtual camp program, but they have been told no every time they try to propose a virtual camp option. So where do people stand in that realm with just the ability to offer a virtual youth activities? Awesome. Thank you, Nick, for sharing. I feel like this is very much a time of other duties as assigned for some of us who can't run camp programs. And Lauren at Columbia, your camp is primarily a sports camp, if I remember correctly. Awesome. Yeah, I think that may be part of it. What types of programs people are running. Jean, that's a wonderful idea with a where are they now? I really like that unique way to engage former staff that maybe be camper favorites. I saw, Jean, you said you have a Facebook group. We also started a private Facebook group for our youth programs supporters, primarily our families, as a way for them to connect with one another and share resources. It's mostly just been me sharing resources, but we're hoping to build that up and continue to do that. I wanted to open it up to thoughts of this group. This came up in another group I was in, but what is our role to provide new programming for youth with so much already out there by other people or other entities that may do this year round? What are some thoughts about that space?
So our camp is focusing mostly on the programming that we usually provide in person. So typically in person, we do the STEM, arts and crafts, all of that general activities. But we, of course, cut out our swimming and rock climbing because that's a little difficult to do virtually. But I think because we do it so differently than other camps, because we are focusing on the teaching and the learning of it and the growth within that, because we really focus on getting the kids out of their comfort zone and into their stretch zone. I've seen a lot of other camps because I watch a lot of kids, so I see them in their virtual summer camps. It's more of how can we keep this kid distracted for 3 hours instead of how can we keep this kid engaged and learning in these virtual settings. And I saw Jen's question of charging. Ours currently is free, but that's because we had the budget and resources. We did what was mentioned earlier, where we pulled staff from other departments on campus that had the budget and payroll, and we redirected their work to working for the camp. And then everything else that wasn't essential and a current running program was then furloughed or redirected elsewhere.
Yeah, cost seems to be something that has come up a lot with virtual options. So I would love to hear maybe those who are doing like send home subscription based, what are you charging, as well as people who are running programs? Adam, it sounds like you all are doing experimental virtual programming. I like that adjective choice.
Yeah, when we first all went to stay at home, Western and our outreach and continuing ed program decided that we wanted a place to initially gather staff and other people that were feeling disconnected. And our Western Cares platform started to offer just, free 1 hour sessions, anybody that wants to volunteer to teach something. And I argued to adopt it into our enrichment program team, and I'm going to try to keep it as an experimental platform moving forward. So just resonating with that and bringing, folks on. It's supposed to be free and low cost. For us, it's going to be a gateway into our other programs so that we can advertise programs. And it gives us a great space to just experiment with what's working. Under an hour is really good. Family friendly is good. Yeah, that's what we've learned thus far.
Awesome. Yeah, I think we are all flying by the seat of our pants right now when it comes to what virtual activities look like, especially virtual youth, and recognizing that all of our institutions have very different policies and what we can and can't do. John from Arizona State in the chat, scavenger hunts and cahoots have been the big winners, and show and tell activities. It's awesome. We did a show and tell with our professional staff, and that was a big win. So if you're looking for a team builder, I would start with one of those. John, you said your other activities, arts and crafts, fitness, and wellness safety. How have those been going? And you can either chat it or come off mute if you're comfortable.
They've been somewhat engaging, but the kids get easily distracted just because they're not as interested in it. We have some our aquatics and safety education instructor has been leading those activities. And so he's doing things from like the Red Cross, and they're engaged for a few minutes, but after a while they lose interest. So they've been hit or miss, and it's kind of like the same thing with the fitness activities. For the first 5 or 10 minutes, they seem to enjoy it, but then after a while, they all turn off their cameras and keep asking when we're moving on to the next activity. So it's an up and down battle, but the cahoots and scavenger hunts seem to keep their interest for the entire 25, 30 minutes that they have allocated for it, and it's something that they're always asking for.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, I can only imagine. We get these questions at in-person camp, right? Like, when can we do the next thing? But having it via chat or with their parents overhearing it is a very different dynamic than maybe we're used to with our in-person programs. Virtual activities, I think we've talked about some of these, but opening up the chat space for any creative activities that people have either had success with. Marissa, do you want to talk about your virtual field trips? Because those are awesome.
So last week was our growth week. So we employed a volunteer from our biotrek garden on campus to take our kids on a virtual field trip. So she logged into the Zoom and took over. So she was walking through the biotrek garden, showing all the different plants and talking about them, and talking about how they're used in medicine and in foods, and how this one specific plant is used to make cheese orange. And the kids really enjoyed that. And then afterwards, she had a little bit of time, so she went up to our herbarium and started showing the kids all of the reptiles that were in there, which they really enjoyed. This week it's actually happening in about 10 minutes. They're going to be going on a virtual field trip to see one of our volunteers has a whole bunch of instruments. So this week is our music week, and he's going to be showing them each of the different instruments, how they're classified, how each one sounds, and how they sound together. So last week we had kids putting up in the chat, there's too much information, my mind's exploding. But as soon as our volunteer signed off, they're like, that was so awesome, we learned so much, which is not quite something I hear during our actual field trips when we were having to walk across campus. At that point I hear, I'm tired, can we stop for a minute?
Yeah, I think when Marissa told me that they were doing these virtual field trips, my mind went into, is this a way that when we're back in person in the future, we can creatively engage in some different activities that maybe we have cost barriers to or transportation barriers in the future? I do want to call attention to anybody who may be doing like sport related or recreational related virtual activities, because I know that's been a question we've gotten before. Is anyone doing that either successfully or unsuccessfully right now on a virtual platform? Marissa, are you all doing any sport specific related things?
No, so we've gotten our rec activities. Our rec activity sessions tend to start out with the rec activity, which gets the kids a little bit engaged, and then they want to sit and talk. So very similar to what John's encountering, they'll engage in the activity for like the first 15 minutes or so, and then they're ready to move on. But it seems like they're really pushing for that informal, interpersonal connections.
Awesome.
I see the Sea Discovery Center. I think, as you mentioned, Abby, when we get back in person, this would be a good way to help the campers see areas that are well beyond our reach, even anywhere near us.
Yeah, I think that might be a blessing of COVID is a lot of these opportunities are free and people are really engaging. So like the national parks have virtual tours and things like that, that could be a really unique way for us to continue to offer different programming.
Ethan, how have your how-to videos, have they been getting watched a lot?
Admittedly, I don't believe so, because I think our families are more focused on the live camp that we host each day. But as they kind of find out that it is less rec or sport related, that's something that the kids might be interested in. Our hopes is that they direct them towards that. Live, we've really only done group fitness activities, like I mentioned, and usually we try to put a spin on it, like Simon says do this, Simon says do that, or don't or do. And kids, for the most part, have enjoyed that. However, when we try to go 20 or 25 minutes straight of that, the kids eventually start just sitting down and watching. But I to start, at least, it's been very, very engaging.
Awesome. Thank you, Ethan. And I appreciate the space and people are kind of owning what's not working. I think that's super helpful for us as we live in this space. Awesome. We're going to talk a little bit about managing virtual risk because it's important. Marissa, do you want to talk about maybe some of the highlights or things you may have learned or not thought about when this started?
So for our online safety with minors, of course, the safety is the number one, especially when you're working with kids. So we had this whole plan. We were going to have the Zoom meetings, password set, different one each week. We were going to have the waiting rooms, and as soon as the campers logged in, we were going to lock the meeting completely. That way no one else could come in. But then we learned that the campers get disconnected very easily and quite often throughout the meeting. So we didn't end up doing the locked meetings, but we have the waiting room set up, and that lets us see who's trying to get into the meeting, and we can adjust accordingly and only let in those that we actually recognize. We also have waiting rooms set up or passwords set up on each of the meetings. And we make each of our campers log in with video on. And if the campers turn off the video throughout the meeting, we click on the button to ask them to turn it on. And when they keep denying it, we just spam them until they turn it back on. That's just so that we could see that it's a camper on the other end of that video stream. Thank you, Bruce. I didn't have to spam you.
Awesome.
Yeah, so it's just paying attention to what barriers may be there to allow any risks in.
Yeah. And I think we've talked about before, making sure you're checking with your campuses about their online safety requirements, recognizing that pretty much everyone has said mandated reporting is still a thing, keeping that 2-to-1 staff ratio at minimum, never just having one staff member in the room at one time. How has Marissa managing the group chat feature been working with campers?
So in the main chat room, we learned that we can completely turn off chat, which really helps when we're trying to send out an announcement to the entire group. Because when we have everyone together, the chat just goes insane. In the breakout rooms, we don't have that control. So what we do is a lot of our staff have caught on to let the campers in the beginning blow up the chat. Then they'll go over our full value contract and rules and get them ready for the activity session. And during the activity session, they say no chats. If you're putting on the chat, then we're gonna sit here. And the kids have caught on to that because at the end of the session, the staff give them about 5-10 minutes to blow up the chat as much as they want. And they really hold on to look forward to those last couple minutes where they can throw as many period marks in the chat as they possibly can and see how high the number they can get.
Awesome. Jacob brought up a good question, establish staff camper ratios for virtual camp. ACA hasn't put anything out there in particular, but their best practice from the American Camp Association has been their normal staff ratios. So depending on the age group, 1-8, 1-10, 1-12, but then also not only having one staff member in a space. Awesome. We've talked about virtual platforms a lot. I know Marissa is using Zoom. Some other people have talked about Google Classroom. We talked about that last time. Facebook groups, just using newsletters as a way to connect. Any other considerations or different platforms that people would like to bring to this group's attention, pluses, minuses?
We decided to stick with Zoom because it was already approved through the university. And if we wanted to get another software approved through the university, that would take up to another 6 months before we could get our virtual programming started.
Yeah, and I'm on the other side. Zoom is not a preferred platform for our campus, so we have to look at other options as well to engage any of our virtual programming. I know in the chat people talked about newsletters, and I think a lot of us are just pushing content to our families. So how is that going for people? Are there ways that you all have been able to be creative to actually make that useful? Or is this just kind of, we want to be a resource to our families and we're just going to put something out there? Nick, I'm going to put you on the spot because your video's on and I know you're doing this. How has been resource sharing with families? Has that been well received or any feedback at all?
Yeah, so I know originally when we just did resources, when we did our cancellation letter, we put that link on there. And then what I did as well, we hand wrote letters to all of our campers.
Uh-oh, we might have lost Nick. We'll give him a minute. Okay, we'll keep going. Nick, if you come back to us, just interrupt. But Crystal from NAU just being a resource. Similarly with us at Wisconsin, we just wanted to be a resource for our families and for them not to forget about us when next year's registration comes around. Awesome. Before we move into kind of thinking about reopening or youth in the future, are there any other questions, comments that people want to bring to this group around virtual programming? Marissa, anything else from a virtual camp director right now that you would like to add?
One thing that I learned is very difficult is keeping attendance and track record of who actually joined us during the meetings, especially with the campers getting on and off the Zoom call due to internet issues, or the 5-year-old saw the red button and wanted to click it, and then they left and now they have to get back into the meeting. It's a lot of trial and error, and as we go through it, we've been asking our families for feedback at the end of every single week to help us improve our Zoom meetings. And a lot of the feedback was, as mentioned before, getting that informal, unstructured, interpersonal connection going for the kids.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Cool. I'm gonna switch gears a little bit and have us think about reopening with youth in mind. I know everyone's campuses are at different places with reopening. Every state has different guidelines about what you're allowed to do, maybe the county or city specific. So we're gonna start that conversation because hopefully we'll all be able to return to our rec centers at some point. So reopening for in-person youth programs, quick kind of status check. If people know if youth programs are going to be permitted in the academic year throughout the summer, where are we at with in-person programs being able to return? And maybe it is I have no idea because we don't even know what our academic calendar is yet. Where are people at with in-person programs and youth? Awesome. Next September with restrictions, and we'll talk about restrictions. I have a couple of slides on that, so I don't want to dive too deep into that piece. Yet.
Abby, for opening up on July 6th, how is hiring for in-person camp and getting them trained in time working? Because that's what we decided not to open up for in-person, because hiring enough and the right staff and training them would take too long.
For sure. So we are actually going to be the only program area open at our rec center. We're really the only area hiring on campus at all right now. So hiring actually is going relatively easy compared to previous years, just because we pretty much get full attention for background checks, for working with our HR team. So that's been pretty much a non-issue. And then for our training for camp, we are actually going to be doing half on video call and then half in person, because we're allowed to have full staff back on or in the rec center the week before our camp opens. So the week previous to that, we're just going to focus on a lot of our traditional training. So just conflict resolution, just working with kids, all of that very basic stuff will be online, broken up in different group calls. And then for really hands-on COVID stuff, walking through what a day will look like, especially with cleaning and restrictions now, we're going to be saving those aspects for the days we're allowed to come in on campus to be physically with everybody.
Awesome. Thank you, Abby, for sharing. And I would love when we get to the cleaning and restrictions to hear kind of what you're thinking about there. Crystal asked like what profitable youth programs are for us. Youth swim lessons are a profitable academic year program, but we don't know if we'll be allowed to have youth back on our campus in the fall or if it'll be campus affiliated youth only. That's what we're thinking may happen, but we don't even know our academic calendar yet. So still working through that. I think something that has come up in some other spaces, are youth considered vulnerable populations? Do we have to have additional requirements because they're children? Thinking about what your campus stance is on that when we return to in-person trainings or programs, sorry. So yeah, additional staff training, additional PPE concerns that people are thinking about with reopening, impacts to staff numbers or ratios or staff trainings, things like that. I would like to open up any questions or things that people are already doing, especially those who are reopening. As people are typing, all of our rec staff will have to wear masks when they are interacting, whether or not that's youth. So that is a huge consideration for us. And our limit right now in PPE is hand sanitizer for our facilities and spaces. Once we have what we feel is an abundance of that, then we'll be more likely to open to all of our members, but no programs at this time for that. We're also doing a virtual video for staff training for this is what it's going to look like when people are in our spaces that we can also share with our members. But to do as much of that training video versus in person, because we do have a lot of restrictions on that as well. Yes, face masks. So deciding when kids have to wear them, and Abby, the CDC has now released guidance that it's not great to wear a face mask during physical activity. So that's a new one for all of us. But then determining where they have to wear them, what that looks like. I saw a very interesting article on social media about a teacher's perspective for face masks and all of the things that they have already thought about their 5-year-old students will do with a face mask. So if you want to think like a 5-year-old, it's a great slingshot, right? There's a lot of things that it can do that's super cool, but how do you manage that with behavioral expectations and things like that? If you have not seen the CDC website, it is really well built out for youth programs and considerations. They have a lot of different yes, no's, but I thought this chart was a really good starting point because the CDC has considerations and it's staggered. So Abby, I'm going to put you on the spot because I think you are one of the only programs that's about to start up. So anything that you want to add or talk about in this space, I would love to hear.
Yeah, of course. So a little bit of context about the Georgia Tech summer camp is that we are pretty much just open to tech faculty and staff. Which was really the driving force for us reopening, as a lot of people are coming back to campus, both to do their research and also to prep for students coming back on campus in the fall, which is really why we have opened for the month of July, just to really help with that burden of people with essentially daycare. So what we have done is we have reduced about 50% capacity for our camp. We'll be taking up a whole lot less room in the rec center, and then it's also a whole lot less room, or a whole lot less for our staff to be cleaning. Our cleaning procedures right now is wiping down tables, before shift, before kids arrive. During the lunchtime period, we're going to have morning shift people staying after to be cleaning up all lunch areas. And then people for the afternoon shift will be staying a bit later after kids have officially left for camp. So then we can make sure we're cleaning surfaces as often as possible. We have gotten rid of field trips. So we are staying just at the rec center for the summer. And also we are not swimming because, as I mentioned earlier, no other area is being staffed at the rec center. So we are really reducing our programming activities. So, I mean, like most of us, we are kind of having to think creatively in terms of programming. What can we do different to keep this camp engaging and fun for kids throughout the day without turning it into day camp and watching movies every day? So we're really right now trying to think of a lot of outdoor activities that we can use, you know, water balloon fights, sprinklers, things that we can still do, like swimming, quote unquote, aspects without actually getting into the pool, because that's always been a big drive for a lot of people at our camp.
Abby, the question came in the chat. Was the Georgia Tech faculty only decision your policy prior to COVID, or was that something that you're doing just because of COVID-19?
Yeah, so that's been our standard for camp for the past 20 years. That's just how we've always operated. We've only ever been at a 70 kid capacity, really just offering it for the tech facility because we are in Metro Atlanta. So the idea is that there are 1.5 million camps going on in the Atlanta area. So we really just want to focus on our community that we're serving.
And how has demand been, even though families will know that there's so many restrictions?
I've gotten really positive feedback from parents that will be on campus, because obviously it's a burden off of them. But for people that do not need to be on campus, it's been a pretty easy choice for them to not come to camp because of all the restrictions that we are having. We've been offering pretty much full refunds, which is something we have never done in the past. We normally require a $25 non-refundable, non-transferable deposit on camp. But just due to the situation on this, we didn't want money to be a restriction for anyone. So we're pretty much doing a full refund at any point if people decide they're not comfortable with either COVID restrictions that we're taking or programming, just so we make sure that people are making the right calls for their families.
Awesome. I know something in our community is once our campus decided that we weren't having camps, everyone had to look elsewhere, and we've been lucky, I guess, that a lot of other camps aren't running. It's not great for the youth in our community, but it means that there's not going to be competition in the future. So it's a little cynical of me to say, but that has been something that we've been grateful for. Not a service to our youth, but most of our economy is still shut down in Wisconsin, so it's we're not really in a reopening space. I think cleaning, disinfecting, those are huge pieces of being able to reopen. I would love to shift the conversation to activity modifications. So if anybody has thought about creative ways to modify activities, whether that be summer camp programming or just youth programming in general. Something that we have looked at here at Wisconsin when we are having youth swim lessons back again is not offering our maybe more entry level where our staff has to be potentially touching our camper or our swim lesson participants, but only offering lessons where that 6 feet physical distancing can be maintained, and or the use of pool noodles, which, fun fact, are 6 feet in length. So if you're ever looking for a good representation, that is something to consider. And so for us, when we are thinking about programs in general, is having creative use of pool noodles potentially as a way to modify tag type games or things like that, just so we can have those programs at some point in the future. Any other activity modification thoughts when it comes to this? Yeah, Nick, parent-child classes will be ones that we still have, but it's kind of that intermediate when the kid can't all the way swim, but parents not in the pool. Those might be the courses that we're not offering. We also offer youth tennis lessons, and that's something that we feel very confident that we can do safely and an early return to our programming, whereas maybe some of our other youth activities we can't. If your school is a Connect to Concept school, there's a great risk matrix that Connect to Concepts has put out regarding programs in general. And something that we have considered is youth are at a higher risk by that matrix just because of the inability to follow directions compared to our college students. So bringing back adult lessons, adult swim versus youth swim, because we know that we hope college students can understand what 6 feet looks like, but can our 4-year-olds do that? We're still trying to weigh what that looks like with activity restrictions. Any other creative ways that people are either implementing or have started to think about in-person activities with youth? Go for it, Abby.
So we have, during our drop off and pickup times, we do pretty much low maintenance activity. So something that I am doing right now is replacing all of our traditional playing cards with waterproof cards. It's just pretty much a thicker plastic with the cards printed on them. So that way they're really easy for our staff to clean, because you can just pretty much throw them in a bucket of dish soap and then they're good to go for the next day. We are trying to figure out how to work with our board game aspect, and that's really just been the best solution that we have right now for those.
Yeah, I think another thing to consider for us, we are very much a don't bring personal items to camp, but we were thinking, what is the harm for someone to bring their own book if that is going to keep them happy during our pickup and drop off, or things like that we try to avoid during traditional programming, non-COVID programming, but trying to be a little bit more lax in those and trying to figure out where our point is, right? Like, we are a cell phone free, electronic free camp, but a lot of those cell phones can keep people entertained during maybe potential downtime. So really looking at policies and figuring out what our non-negotiables are was something we were doing before we're not running programming. The other resource that I wanted to talk about as it comes to modification of activities. So IUPUI just released a really good youth sports study, and it looked at the perspectives that parents have about youth sports and what they find most important. So I have the link in the slides, and I can throw that out there for other people, but sanitation was the biggest thing that they were looking at, as well as sanitation of playing equipment. Some of the things that were surprising were like arrival routes and departure routes, maybe not as important to people, or mask use and things like that. I will say a lot of this was focused on travel sport parents, although they wanted to get a diverse representation. Travel sport parents were the ones who filled out their survey. So it is a little skewed, I think. But the article itself was an interesting take on parents' perspectives. And they did break out recreational versus competitive parents in their sports. And I'll link, that article is linked at the end of the slides if people if they want to read it. Awesome. Any other reopening questions, comments that people want to put out there to the group? Whether they're youth program specific or not, I want to open up kind of the next 10 minutes with space that anybody may have with questions, comments, concerns. Nick, I like your individual craft kit idea so that there's less sharing of markers. That's creative, costly, but creative.
So one thing go ahead. I was going to say the one thing we're looking at here too is like a lot of our programs, we're cancels are kind of looking at like what other streams of revenue we can take. So one of the things that we know in Ohio is that it's kind of going to seem like what the plans are going to be for school age kids. It looks like they're going to go to school 2 days a week and then have to be home for the other days. So one of the things we might potentially be looking at is, do we provide on those days they're not there, like a camp type, come here, bring your iPad, do schoolwork with our students to kind of help be the teachers, if you will, or kind of do like a camp-based thing for them. We have a couple schools right down the road from us that we get mostly all their kids anyway during our school year program. So, and some of them have already been reaching out to us to being like, hey, can we do something? So I know that potentially we're looking at another way to offer some more camp days. We already do school day out camp for the Columbus City schools. So that was kind of something that we're looking in. So a creative way, if you want to help even give back more to the community to look at, that's something that we're kind of looking at too, to see how we can better partner with our schools and kind of even help in that recruiting process for camp in the future too.
Yeah, I think the K-12 calendar is a huge consideration, and that scares me a lot. We had a school district in Wisconsin that sent an email to all their families that they should be prepared to be virtual all of next year. And that's stressful for a parent. So when that email went out, the calls started. So trying to stay up on that. I know in Wisconsin, it'll be a town by town decision, which will make it also harder, but trying to figure out what our surrounding towns are doing and provide a service in that way, if we're allowed to have youth on our campus in the fall.
What about anybody's screening procedures or what to do if a camper starts to show possible signs, anything like that? Obviously, this is something to discuss with each school's higher ups, but it'd be good to get ideas of what everyone else is doing.
Yeah, I will say the CDC guidance on this just changed due to the American Camp Association lobbying them. So June 9th, guidance did change from the CDC about this, which is interesting. I think the big thing is the ability to quarantine campers or youth and staff. And a lot of our spaces on campus are not built like a traditional resident camp that has an infirmary, right? So trying to be creative while humane, like a lot of our ideas were like, well, we have this old office that nobody uses, but it doesn't have windows, right? Like that's not great for a camper if they're in there for a couple of hours. What does supervision look like in those spaces? I think a lot of people are thinking about how we can be creative, but then we also don't know what our traditional college student population programming is going to look like. So trying to balance that on a college campus is important. Jean, do you already know that for sure? That's a for sure thing in Virginia. So are you all thinking about school year programming, or what is that thought process?
So I would say that my stepdaughter is a high school teacher in one city down here, and my husband is an athletic director at a high school in a city an hour and a half away, and both of them have said the same thing. It has not come out from the governor yet, but with both of them being in two different cities and pretty much saying the same thing, yeah, that's kind of like the talk of what's going on. And I've talked to a couple other people who've said it. So yeah, and I there are times that I have thought, I wish that we could do stuff like when school is out for the public schools, that we could do stuff at our facility, but we don't have the space to do it. And I also find that when I've thought about doing it and trying to get our staff, like our my camp staff, to come in during the academic year, it's either they're busy with their classes or, it's their classes or they're working. And I can't get them to come in. So it's not going to work for me. I wish it would.
Yeah, I think something that might be doable this year would be an academic year if they can't work in other areas, but that is a staffing concern, maybe not the facility concern as well. Abby sounds like she has a great setup at Georgia Tech with this conference room with a TV. That's a really unique situation. And only taking the children's temperatures, not children and parents as well. A space that we were considering using for an infirmary was our athletics training room, but if athletics is back on our campus, not usable, but if they're not, then that becomes a space. We're also limited in facility space in general, so it gets tight, and I know some other people probably are in that same space. We can't all be the Ohio States of the world, like Nick, and have their own little spaces. Any other questions, considerations? Awesome. So if you haven't updated your camp status, it's way up at the top, but I will find it again. I would love to see you all do that so that we can continue on this journey of figuring out what other people are doing. I did talk to NIRSA headquarters, and we're thinking we're going to just continue to go monthly to talk about primarily probably reopening with youth in mind, because I think that's kind of where we're all shifting towards. But we will continue to do these monthly until they're no longer important or of use to people. And we also talked about, as we prepare for next summer, these COVID restrictions will probably still be in place, reconvening this group so we can continue those conversations. If anyone has any topics that you specifically want to cover, let me know. Or if you want to co-facilitate, it's a grand old time. We have the PowerPoint now kind of down to a science. So open to any of that as well. Jean?
Yes, so I'm on the conference committee it's actually for 2022, but we're a combination committee. And we were on a call the other day, and we are still looking for presentations for 2021. The deadline is June 24th. So if anybody is interested in submitting a presentation proposal for youth and family programming, please, 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 please do it. We don't get a whole lot that get turned in for that. And we need it. So please, 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 if you're interested in putting in a presentation, please do it. Still not too late to put in presentations for a pre-conference session also.
Yeah,
I think that deadline is also June 24th.
Yeah, and if people have ideas and you may be unsure about being able to go to conference, it is in my home state. It's 50 minutes away, so I'd be happy to collaborate on the actual presentation and present by myself if I'm the only one who can be there, or whatever that looks like. So,
well, and they also said that they are working out things where if the presenter can't make it, that they could present virtually.
Awesome. Yeah, so I would love to engage with anybody. It is on my list to put in a presentation. It has no topic right now outside of youth and family programs. So if anyone has any ideas or wants to collaborate in that space, I would love to do so, because that may be the only conference I can go to this year, and it just happens to be in my backyard. So definitely let me know if people want to collaborate in that space. I'll put one in, and if the number of presenters changes and switches, Jean, can you post a link? Awesome. To the conference. Well, thank you all for another great conversation. I really appreciate this space, and we'll keep them going until they're no longer of use to people. Yeah, Jean.
Can I still post the link once this is over? I mean, it won't go in the chat.
Just post it in the chat, and then it'll be added to the NIRSA website. We have a couple minutes here, so you can find it.
Okay.
As well. And I will send this presentation out to the kind of listserv that we have going with the resources, and then with Jean's link as well, so that we can get it in there. Awesome. Have a great weekend, everybody. Really appreciate you.
Thanks, you too.